I'd like to understand one thing as well. We talked about the Hanabila having followed this methodology of Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, but when we look at the other madhabs and the scholars, upon which methodology were they actually? Obviously, they followed a form of the four circles from the first three generations, but through whom did it come to them actually?
Alhamdulillah. Well, there's different, their methodology and the ways that they gathered people unto themselves was slightly different because the circumstances they faced were different. So for many Malikis, you will find that they were impacted by Abu Madian, Abu Hasan al-Shazili, and similar people. They were impacted by this because those were the people that they had access to. Those were the people around them. And sometimes they say that there's linkage between these people and Shaykh Al-Jilani rahimahullah. It's unknown whether this is the case. This might be apocryphal. It might be true. If you listen, if you go further up the chain, maybe you might find that, because all these ulama are related either by lineage or by knowledge. So that's true. That's possible. As far as direct, it's unknown. But the case of it is the other madhahib gathered this knowledge because they also saw massive social upheavals that required their attention. So amongst the Ahnaf or the Hanafis, you had the Imam Naqshband, Bahauddin Shah Naqshband, who dealt with the same social issues, the same abnormalities and imbalances in his area, and the same needs that people required, and the same tajdeed that they required. And this was the advent of the Naqshbandiyya, which later was picked up by the Ottomans. Right? We see the same thing among the Shafi'is. They had their own people that required this. And so there were Shafi'is who had this methodology, Suhrawardi way, or they had something like it, or sometimes something inspired by it while not having one. Like Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he wasn't necessarily connected to any of the turuq, but he had their methodology. He followed that way of tremendous zuhud and righteousness. So the popularity that some of the turuq have had among some of the madhahib has had to do with circumstances that they encountered, conditions that they needed, which were similar conditions that Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahimahullah had to contend with. Because the ummah has different circumstances that it gets put in different epochs of time. And Baghdad was not the only place. There was Fez, there was Caesarea, there was Tripoli, the one in North Africa, as well as the one in Lebanon. And the sheikhs had to work together to alleviate these stains that have been put upon the science, and also the trauma that certain members of the ummah were going to relieve that pressure. And so by doing this, these turuq formed in whatever shape, way, or fashion that they did to try to assess this damage and to try to alleviate it.
SubhanAllah. And Sheikh, when we talk about us being upon the way or the ihsan of Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, can people say the same thing, that they're upon the ihsan of Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali? Is that the similar thing?
There's a lot of people who say that they follow that methodology, that their outlook is the Ghazali outlook, right? In particular, many sheikhs from Yemen state that they organize their pattern, their books, and their methodology according to that, and that methodology was also carried by them to Indonesia and Malaysia when the people there came into Islam, and it was carried to them. So yes, you can find that this is indeed the case, that these people have carried on the methodology of Imam Ghazali and have used his iyyah as a blueprint for discharging their obligations. Now, for us, we tend to talk about tahkim, ta'aleem, and tatbiq, but for them, it's more 5. There's like 5 things instead of 3, right? Which is just not harmful. 5 things rather than 3. We're just talking about organizing knowledge. When they gather their data and their details, because Imam Salih al-Shami, hafidhullah, he also did a summary of the Ihya Ulumuddin as well. So you have the Ihya Ulumuddin, then what happened was Imam Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah did a summary of that called Minhaj al-Qasidin.
MashaAllah.
Then after that, Imam Najmuddin al-Maqdisi rahimahullah did a summary of that called Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin. Then Imam Salih al-Shami went back to the Ihya and created another summary, right? And so these things show you the methodology. And what he's kind of done is in that summary with occasional notes, he's kind of tried to bring it in line, more in line with Shaykh al-Jilani with regards to the hadith citations, because there's some ahadith that are da'if or what have you, but they're not da'if where they're completely rejected. They've been put there for a purpose and what they're pointing to. So he's tried to mainly focus on the overall gist of the ihsan and methodology that should be there. So he's tried to streamline it and bring it in line.
I've come across several times as well that you find some scholars of Al-Azhar that they're upon the way, the Junaidi way. Now, is this also something similar like the methodologies of Imam Ghazali and Imam Al-Jilani that we're discussing? The Junaidi.
Well, Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahimahullah, he's come through this.
Right.
They've come through this. It was what was bequeathed to us. So when we see this, we then start to look, okay, are they doing this?
All right.
Because the Rasail of Imam al-Junaid are in the earth. What he established through Abu Salih Muflih ibn Abdullah al-Damashqi, who established the Jami Abi Salih, which is then funneled down to others. We then reach similar people like Abu Ismail al-Ansari rahimahullah and others. It's come down to us.
Right.
So we want to see, are they getting the same results? Do they produce the same results? Are they doing the same things? Because that's the chain it's come through, because we're back at Ma'ruf al-Kharqi and Sirri Saqati and similar people. So when people say that, they're in general talking about their allegiance to that same methodology of sabr and samaha of Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahimahullah. The only thing is they have to maintain it in consistency and righteousness.
There's an interesting thing as well. At one point, we have the split between Ihsan and Suluk. Now, could you tell us why this happened and what exactly this even meant, the split?
Alhamdulillah. So what occurs is, in the time of the great catastrophe of Baghdad, Al-Nakbat al-Kubra, or sometimes called Al-Nakbat al-Uzma, this catastrophe in 656 of the Hijri, or AD 1258 of the Kafir era, the Tatars sweep in and devastate Baghdad, killing millions of people over a number of months. The Tigris and Euphrates River running black with ink and red with blood because of the books and bodies dumped into them, respectively. The Tatar already have a shamanistic religion, and they've absorbed elements of other religions that they think are useful in a practice known as syncretism. So some of them start to absorb elements of Islam. They start saying the Hada and saying other things and calling themselves Sufis. And this is the same thing that led to the Ahmadiyya tariqah absorbing a lot of these people, which we talked about, Shaykh Imaduddin al-Maqdisi rahimahullah. During this happening, every one of these people that was committing syncretism was uttering that they were Sufi.
Wow.
And committing all these grandiose things. So a separation was made by the Imam Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, Shamsuddin ibn Qayyim, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, as well as Muhammad Uthman al-Zahabi rahimahumullah, in which they before Tasawwuf were talking about the states of the heart and the suluk, the methodology, but now they separated it off. They said it's not enough to say that you're a Sufi while committing the actions, all types of actions of kufr, and neglecting the revealed law. because Taqi ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah found that they were reciting the testimonies and things like this, but he said about them that they would not pray or do any of the other affairs of Islam except that they venerated the fast of Ramadan. And that's very strange because you'll find that some Muslims today have that Tatari influence.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Where they'll venerate Ramadan.
Yes.
But then they won't pray or do any of the other aspects of Islam. And this is that Tatar Sufiya, false Sufiya that they created. So Taqi ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah makes this split to discuss tasawwuf, the states of the heart and everything else, and then suluk, the limbs, being in congruence with the heart. So this is why Majmu' Fatawa has volume 10 and volume 11. 10 is the suluk, 11 is the tasawwuf.
MashaAllah.
Right? Imam Rajab al-Hanbali rahimahullah then discusses the same principles. So does Ibn Qayyim and Madhahib al-Salikin and other kutub to break these things down. And this is why you hear people talking about ilm al-suluk and ilm al-tasawwuf, because originally they were joined together, but then they were separated because you have to make this principle known that committing all types of kufr while saying that you are upon tasawwuf is not enough. The limbs must be in congruence with the heart. So this is how this happened. And with this, the Ahmadiyya tariqah fizzled out, and they ceased to be because of this insistence upon suluk. Because now it wasn't enough to merely say, I am this, and not live up to or implement with the limbs the affairs that were there.
This tariqah, was it at that time that it was present?
The Ahmadiyya was very large, but they were known for fornication, orgies, and shamanistic practices of syncretism. Okay. And this is why Imaduddin Ash-Shami, he left it.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
Shaykh Ibn al-Hazamiyin, he was in a well, wasn't he in a distorted form of Rifa'i tariqah? Was it?
Yes, he was. The Ahmadiyya was this distortion.
Okay.
The Ahmadiyya was a distortion of the soul. So he witnessed this, and he wound up having a really hard time after having left it, because he put everything down and then said, I'm going to start to relearn again, because he'd been so poisoned. So he met Taqi ibn Taymiyyah, who told him not to debase himself of tasawwuf. So he began, and he wrote a book, My Journey from Corrupted Acts of Tasawwuf to the Tasawwuf of the Early Generations. And you'll see in that book, there's a whole bunch of references to Imam al-Junaidi, Shaykh al-Jilani, and a host of other, a galaxy of other scholars that we've already discussed. And he compares and contrasts between the corruptions he saw and that, while purifying the creed, the fiqh, and the other affairs in discussing this.
SubhanAllah.
Yes.
I would like to ask you then this, and this is before I would move on to the next subject. It is, if let's say somebody, he is presented with a Shaykh Center tariqah. Now we know with the fatwa of Imam Abdul Qadir Badran, Imam Al-Bouti, Imam Wahb Zuhaili, that it is best to abstain. But let's say somebody, he's presented and he wants to know if it is sound or not. Now, how does he know? How can he recognize the soundness of a Shaykh Center tariqah?
The soundness of a Shaykh Center tariqah. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. The first that he looks at is, are they teaching the four rings? Does the Shaykh have the four rings? He's teaching them. Does he have the mastery in this area? And what fruit is he producing? What are the people like? These areas, what do they have of the rings? The creed, the fiqh, signs in the time, ihsan. Okay, does the Shaykh have this? Is he knowledgeable of it? Because if I find that I'm in dubious affairs, or I'm in a doubtful matter, I can ask him. Or I can ask him, and he'll get access to people who can furnish the answer. Does he have this? And what are the people? What type of people does he make? If the people that he makes are alcoholics, or they're drunkards or charlatans and violent people that are bent on nothing but the dunya and fleshly carnal desires, that's the indicator right there that he doesn't want to poison himself with this.
So, if I may just summarize the things we just discussed. So, when we talk about the complete package of Ihsan, the full methodology, we're looking at the way of Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, and we can also look at the way of Imam al-Ghazali.
Yes,
And,
this is correct.
And whatever else came later, those are methods, and that's all Sheikh-based turuq, which is permissible to follow if they are sound.
Yes, this is correct.
Oh yeah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Now, having made this clear, alhamdulillah, jazakallah khairan, I want to move to a next subject, which is about certain books and certain scholars, things that need to be clarified that are out there and people have wrong understanding about. Now, I want to firstly discuss Imam Ibn al-Jawzi and his book called Talbis Iblis. Now, certain groups have used this book and claimed that the Imam has disparaged a lot of high-ranking scholars who were masters of tasawwuf, and have basically said that he opposed tasawwuf and so many things. Now, could you clarify this issue of Imam al-Jawzi and his Talbis Iblis?
Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. The people that read Talbis Iblis in the original Arabic can see that his attacks are upon the mutasawwifa, the students of tasawwuf. There are also attacks upon matters that are not from the first three generations. But his attack is not upon all Sufia, because as we've already established, he did a summary of Ihya Ulumuddin entitled Minhaj al-Qasidin. We also know his Sifat al-Safwa is a catalog of Sufia, which he refers to as Zuhad or Ubad and all of the types of time. But we know what he's talking about. We know exactly what he's talking about. He refers to their karramat or their waqa'at or the other things that happened at their hands. These are all the affairs that we know of the soul. His discussion in Sayd al-Khatir, his other book, Sayd al-Khatir, about the creed, about his further elucidation of his creed, which is entirely another discussion, as well as the Sufia and of his time, as mentioned in Sayd al-Khatir. You can see that his attacks were not upon the institution of Ihsan or Ihsan itself for Tasawwuf. His attacks were upon certain students of Tasawwuf and also some of the people who were falling short. And this is not unusual because Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahimahullah disparaged most of the Sufiya of his time, as is said by Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali in his biography of him. He disparaged them. That's why he said, my foot is on the walis of Allah, my foot is on them. Now that part, Imam al-Jawzi rahimahullah did not disparage him for. He disparaged him for his ta'assub and making people change method. That's where he disparaged him. Because he is right to disparage the latter day generations for falling short in the methodology of the first three generations. Because as Ibn Rajab rahimahullah said of Ibn al-Jawzi, few people were as knowledgeable of the first three generations and their states and behaviors and matters than Imam Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah. So when you look and understand, okay, did the first three generations, was this their hal and this matter? You go straight to Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah. It's a hujjah. And he would say, no, it's not. Sifat al-Safwa is an example. No, he's not. Hasan al-Basri did this. You go straight to Sifat al-Safwa. No, he didn't. Because his cataloging of the first three generations was so voluminous. It was so complete. It was so meticulous. And he lived by that standard, which is why he wasn't afraid to go to jail he wasn't afraid to go to jail for certain criticisms he had about the Ihya, even though he wrote a summary of it, or criticisms he had about Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani And run-ins he had with one of his grandsons, Ruknuddin, who was a Shiite, got him put in jail. So we know of Imam al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, that he was a student of Shaykh al-Jilani. He was a successor of him. This is certainly not the case of someone who's against tasawwuf or Sufiya. This is the case of someone who looks at the exaggerations and other matters and looks to clear the air regarding these affairs, to return people to a similar basis of the early generations in which they are devoid of unnecessary fighting and accretions that have been attached to the religion. And that is really the core and thrust of it all.
If I may ask you, as of a clarification, what was his specific issue with the Ihya?
Alhamdulillah. Imam al-Jawzi rahimahullah had an issue with the Ihya because of its inclusion of weak and ahadith in one riwayah that could be fabricated. He had a problem with this, but it's because his stringency on hadith collection was so rigid, as well as his methods for their use as proofs. It's one of the reasons why his stringency for the validity of using certain ahadith as proof, even if they're Hasan, was so stringent. This is why he had disputes regarding i'tiqad. This is why he had these disputes regarding, because he would say, oh, this is an idaf or this is a sifa, because of the ahadith that might be used in other affairs. So he had his own methodology for discussing hadith, grading, clarification. And that has to be kept in mind. So his book, Al-Mawdu'at, the fabricated hadith, that has to be read with other muhaqqiqeen that have discussed that book. Right. So his criticism of the Ihya is that, but you have to remember that the use of weak hadith in which the narrators are not liars or known fabricators are sinful is permitted. But Imam al-Jawzi rahimahullah, his methodology, he ran contrary to the position of most scholars, and in particular Hanbali scholars, on that topic. So he was very rigid about that. So sometimes, and if you look at a lot of his books, sometimes he won't even have Hasan hadith in. He'll just have Sahih, not even Hasan Sahih, because that's a rung down. He's no Sahih. And his shart, his condition for use of ahadith and inclusion, sometimes is more stringent than Al-Bukhari and Muslim. So you have to remember this when he's saying things. And sometimes he's at such a high level of scholarship that sometimes he won't say that, like he'll say, oh, this hadith is fabricated, but he means that transmission or that wording. He doesn't mean every hadith on the topic. So you have to balance that with other things. But Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah, he's this towering figure.
His Talbis Iblis, unfortunately, some people only quote it when it has something to do with the Sufis or Tasawwuf, but in reality, he's addressing all types of areas, isn't he, in that book?
Yes, I mean, there's things in there when people like to quote things about the Sufiya. I quote things about people who don't study Zuhud and are hard-hearted, the people of Qaswa, the hard-hearted people. Yeah, this is for you then. When people quote things about, oh, well, the students of knowledge, let me quote things about evil scholars and the rulers. There's something in there for everybody.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
There's nothing in there that he's not unturned. He has a section there about the people that obsess over tajweed rules and ignoring the main point of what it is learning them for. They obsess over the rules to the degree that they actually forget the purpose behind the principle. The people that obsess over fiqh to the degree of the principle, the ta'assub that people express to the degree that it causes hostility with other people. And it actually sets other Muslims' hearts against them, or they set their hearts against other Muslims because of this ta'assub. The over examination in plenary matters of creed, like what we see today.
Yeah, interesting.
You know, these things are all affairs that he deals with in that kitab. And it sort of advertises the mindset of the people that are citing that. It kind of almost makes you realize, well, these people are in the book as well. You know, the people that are obsessing about it's like, yeah, you're in there too. The fact that you just chose that selection, because there's a section in there about people who only take one part of the book and deny another. That's in there too.
Allah.
That they cite selectively from kutub in order to refute their opponents, when in actuality, those parts refer to them too. These the mutanatti'een and the mutashaddideen, it's you too. But they ignore this.
And he refutes cults like the Khawarij as well, in it.
Yes, all these types of things, the cults, he refutes the government scholars. He has all other things that are in here. But that can be lost if you're not paying attention to the overall message. And it's one of the unfortunate things. When you read a book, you should, unless it's stated otherwise, you should read the introduction. Because the introduction tells you how to use that book. It tells you how to use it. And Talbis Iblis has a good introduction on how to use the kitab and why it was written. And when you really read it, like Sayd al-Khatir, which is a collection of his thoughts on a number of things, when you really look at that, there's a lot that goes in there. A lot that goes in there, Sayd al-Khatir, which is one of the reasons why people haven't been too keen to translate that in English. Because when you balance Sayd al-Khatir with Talbis Iblis, all of a sudden, but that, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sayd al-Khatir is just as much needed as Talbis Iblis, because it's a counterbalance. Just as much as Kitab al-Khabar al-Sifat is a counterbalance to Dafa Shubha Tashbih. It's a counterbalance. And in fact, you can see when you read Kitab al-Khabar al-Sifat that Dafa Shubha is like extracted from there.
Right.
Even though it was published lastly. So you have to look at Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah, like how you look at a fine diamond. It has a fine and beautiful diamond has many different sides to it, not one. Only one person looks at one side and says, this is all the diamond there is. No, this diamond has many different sides. Many different sides. And that he would be used by secularists or cultists as some type of meter stick when he has vicious attacks against them. And Sayd al-Khatir is it would be humorous if so much wasn't on the line. But it's very bizarre and very strange that that's done.
I remember at one point reading a very interesting bit from the Talbis Iblis where he was addressing some of the mistakes of the Zuhat, and it was on eating meat. And he said that some of them exaggerate in not eating meat. And he gives you also medical advice that eating time to time meat is necessary for the body.
Yes.
And I found
this is completely true.
Yeah, so these kind of things are interesting because he mentions Zuhat, the cults, the ulama, the Qurra, and unfortunately, this is only based upon one direction for Tasawwuf only.
I mean, if you look at the hadith of the Rasulullah, which has been quoted several times, it's in the Jami' al-Saghir, Imam Suyuti. أكثر منافق أمتي قراؤها. Most of the munafiq of my ummah will be the qurra, the Quran reciters. And for some reason, that hadith doesn't make it in English very often. Isn't that curious? Isn't that curious? Even though Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, he's quoted on different occasions. But for some reason, that quote just doesn't make it to the final. It's like it winds up on the cutting room floor. Whoopsie, we can't. Yeah, because that's gonna cause problems with a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
Or the hadith that he's quoted that Ibn Rajab has also quoted, the famous hadith that's also collected by Suyuti and it's the Jami' al-Saghir. A time will come where there will be men that delve deeply into the religion, and then they will see the rulers of their time, and they will say, if only we could gain near to them and take what they have of the earthly life, but stay separate with our religion. But that shall not be the case. Just as nothing is harvested from the thorny tree but thorns, and nothing's gained from nearness to the rulers except sins. For some reason, that one doesn't hit English very often. That's strange. I mean, there was a book that cited it, but then it went out of print. It's just these types of things. People choose the things that they believe are the measuring sticks for themselves to use and beat other people with, when in reality that could be used for you. So we have to be mindful in the process of looking to refute or argue, which we discussed before about the endemic dangers in trying to use debates and arguments as a way to gain ilm, because it's not. Right? We have to be aware of this and seek refuge in Allah from this, because you don't get ilm from arguing. You just get, your temperature just goes up and you get extra salt in your bloodstream. You don't get ilm from arguing.
It's like
You get ilm from learning.
On these things, like it is today kind of a norm, you can say, perhaps in Anglosphere and the Muslim country as well, that this is the way of obtaining knowledge. And as they're so obsessed with debates with Christians, debates with Salafis, it's like today it's seen like
which they don't understand that. Excuse me to interrupt, but which they don't understand is, when you debate like this, what if the person who is upon the truth is not skilled in the manners of debate?
Exactly.
So what does this take away from the truth? What if the person that is being debated with becomes angry because you've disrespected the religion or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He becomes angry. But that means now the truth is with the person who maintained his school?
Yeah.
What if the person that aggresses against the one who does not want to debate, demands to debate him, and the other person says that he doesn't want to, and the aggressor towards him in debate says, you're scared of me. So because the person doesn't want to debate, that means he's not on the right?
Yeah.
These are things that come from a very evil, vile soul. And that spirit of contention, that's that shaitani spirit of contention. It's a shaitani spirit.
Because the winner actually here is the one who has prepared the best debate, basically, the arguments.
That's it.
The best argument.
And those arguments might be foolish. Those arguments might be foolish. There are people who are well poised in debates, and some people who don't like being in front of crowds, so they stutter and they stammer.
Yes.
What that means that they're not upon the truth? No, that's not indicative of whether they're telling the truth. The Rasul was not a skilled debater. That's why when people asked, he gave them ayat from the Quran. That's why the first thing he said, do you worship these when they can neither hear nor harm? They can neither help nor harm. Quraysh wanted to bring up stuff about, well, how can this be, and bring our ancestors back and everything else. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down ayat to tell them this. He just told, here's the revelation, tell them this. So these types of things are very important in the ayah in Surah Al-Nahl, and debate with them with wisdom. The hikmah there, all scholars of tafsir say, with the Quran. With the Quran. Not Socrates, not Plato, not Aristotle, not Euclid, not Archimedes. With the Quran. What are you saying about revelation? This revelation has been given to us. Well, I don't accept that. Why not? Here's something from the revelation. What do you think about this? Well, that doesn't make sense to me. Why? Because now we're on subject. We're on point. You want to argue about, whether, men and women are equal and all these other things, which in reality, what you really want is you want to discuss the revelation, because that's where all this is coming from. The whole reason why I'm saying that we're different and everything is coming from the revelation. That's where all this is coming from.
So in the first 3 generations, you don't have the thing that people today think, which was a norm, is like you have one person, he speaks for amount of time, and then the other speaks for amount of time.
No, this was not the case. In fact, when the Muslims arrived in Damascus, John of Damascus, who was an Arab Christian, was the chief amongst them. He's called one of the Desert Fathers, the Church Fathers. He was invited to Islam, and he attacked Islam and said, I reject this, everything else. They kept inviting him, he kept rejecting, and then he retired to his cloister and wrote a book called The Epicurious, the Heretics, and said that Islam was some type of Catholic corruption, and that Prophet Muhammad was a renegade priest and all this craziness. But he's the father of that. So when you hear Christians say that, they're taking from John of Damascus, known as Yohanna, or Mansur Yohanna. That's his name. But when you understand this, they invited him. He didn't want to accept. Fine, you don't want to accept. You don't have questions? Fine, you don't have questions. You have questions? Okay, we're going to try to answer your questions. But our job is to present to you. Our job is to present the faith. That's what it's the job of. And that has skill, whether you're talking on an individual level, on a group level, or on a nation level. The people the Justinians that converted and transformed their Justinian cloister into Jamia Salahi in Nablus, they weren't convinced by debate.
Wow.
A Zahid from the Hanabila went to them and spoke to them, and they were overwhelmed by the answers that he gave to their questions. And so they converted in mass. That's when you're using tasawwuf. The same thing of the residents of Duma. Same thing of Dumayr and Ruhayba. They were overwhelmed by the presentation. And the answer my questions. What about this? Answer my question. So if you answer more questions, but the fact is, some of these people that want to do these debates, they don't have answers because they only have canned arguments to debate. That's it. And one of the things that tasawwuf should do is it should make you a substantive person. By substantive, it means that you're someone of substance. You don't have just a surface aspect to yourself. You're substantive. You speak when you need to speak. You declare when you need to declare. When you don't understand, I don't know. I don't understand. I will find out. And your goal isn't to win. Your goal is to present matters in as clear and concise way as possible so that the other side understands and it answers their question to the degree possible. Whether they agree with that, what they've received that's a different matter. But the fact is, yes, I understand the answer to my question, but I still disagree. Okay, well, that's a different issue. Is there another question that you have? Yes. How come this? It's the job is to make you substantive. Most of these debate people and these speakers, as they call themselves, they're not substantive people. They're not. They are 1 mile wide and 1 inch deep. What I mean by that is they look huge. Oh, they're so profound and everything else. But if you just look inside of them, creed-wise, fiqh-wise, ihsan-wise, they're an inch deep. They're an inch thick because there's nothing there. And that's why the type of things that they do, the type of people that they produce are 1 mile wide and 1 inch deep. And it becomes a catastrophe because those people, their hearts won't stay unsure for long. Those hearts need to be filled. They're either going to be filled with kufr or filled with iman. But your heart won't let you stay like that, wavering and being just fed talking points. The heart needs to be nourished. So either we're going to do this or we're not. Heart is either filled with kufr or it's filled with iman. That's it.
And it is interesting that today's these so-called speakers, you find them, there at one point there'll be something, and then another point there'll be something else, or there'll be a mix of some things.
Yes, they are not equipped or prepared to feed their people, spiritually or physically. And it's our job to take those steps. If there's not an organization to do it, then we just jump, we take it on. We learn the ahkam, we learn the rulings on it, and we discharge our duty. If someone's homeless in any place, we figure out a way to get them somewhere where they've got a roof over their head. We figure it out. We don't look around and wait for someone else to do it. It's our job to understand these people exist in a vacuum. That's why they exist, because there are imbalances in the wider population around them. And because there are these imbalances, they've taken advantage of that. That's what they've done. So where there are no real Sufis or Sufi sheikhs, these people appear. Oh, look.
Wow.
Where there is no fiqh, cultists will slide in and say, you don't need any fiqh anyway. Just follow us. We've got everything. Where there is no real creed being taught and learning of mutun and learning and teaching and judging and implementation, other people slip in and give you debates on who's not really Muslim and who really is and who's mujassim and who's not mujassim and you're mu'attil. No, I'm not. I'm not mu'attil. You're mu'attil. Well, you're mujassim and you're mushabbih. Well, you're mu'attil and you're jahmi. People don't even know what these terms mean, that people get killed behind these things. People have been executed in the past because of these things. But they're happy using these terms. You attribute to Allah things that don't even befit him. They don't even know what bima yuliqu. They don't even know what it means to what befits him. They don't even understand the significance of these words. It's just a word in their mind. It's just a statement on the tongue that wets their tongue.
No repetition.
And as I've said before, we're going to see the truth about these people, because just as there was the big movement where everybody was Salafi, I'm Salafi, we're Salafi, the kitty cats are Salafi, everyone's Salafi. Then there was that huge collapse. The same thing is going to happen with this current wave. There's going to be a big collapse. And there need to be Muslims ready to catch some of these believers as they fall backwards through the door of Islam, apostating out of it. There need to be brothers and sisters to catch them and say, no, just because this failed doesn't mean Islam failed. This was a movement, and it was a flavor of Islam. You were given a spoonful of Islam. That's not the meal. So don't become obsessed with this. That's the reality.
SubhanAllah. And Sheikh, our scholars, they use the words khusumat and jidal, right? When it comes to arguments and debates, like these are the impermissible things.
Yeah. Yes, the last page of the Lum'ah is to avoid khusumat and jidal, because destruction awaits. Destruction awaits. And everyone thinks I'll be the one that's too smart for that. I'm going to be the one that won't happen. Everybody thinks that. Just like no one believes that he'll be the one that gets in a car accident if he drives unsafely. Everyone believes that they can drive as recklessly as they want to and they've got it under control. Everyone thinks that. But the fact of the matter is, we all have to take precautions. And precautions, being cautious of haram or the things that lead to haram, is known as wara'. And it's one of the things within tasawwuf. So even there, we go back to tasawwuf and the affairs connected to it. And Allah give us the ability to implement these things, because all these rings or these circles, they're all important. They're all connected. And it's necessary that they are in tandem and they're connected, so that we aid one another. Because there's two Muslim brothers, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted from them, that are talking about they want to visit me over the summer period, precisely because they feel that these circles of their rings from there, they feel that they're not in full alignment. So it then becomes my obligation to try to assist. See, that's the thing. People will come into your life at different times. They need your assistance. They're not going to, the people that are looking for power, rank, and carnal status, they're not going to do that, because they don't want to open up their homes to these people, because what they have is pageantry. When you open up your home, you have to serve people, which is khidmah. These people don't want to serve, they want to lead. And that's completely different. They want to lead. I'm the captain. I'm in charge. Not you, me. They want to lead, and they'll use any method to try to disrupt that. Sometimes they'll say, well, they'll use racial stuff to try to solidify or keep their base. They might use ethnic stuff. Sometimes they'll try to use, well, you don't know anything. Well, subhanAllah, it's like, listen, all this stuff doesn't detract from the main point, and that's khidmah. That's the service. You're here to serve. And when people come to you, they're doing you the favor, not you them. They're doing you a favor. You keep that in mind, victory is certain.